Dr. Imani Wright clutches her designer briefcase as security guards forcibly drag her down the airplane aisle. Fellow passengers record the humiliating scene on their phones. Her pleas about being a respected investment manager fall on deaf ears. Flash forward. Imani stands confidently at a press conference as Atlantic Airline's stock plummets on screens behind her. She announces pulling $4 billion in investments from the company. The airline CEO's face pales in horror as he realizes who she really is. How did a routine flight turn into a $4 billion nightmare for an entire airline? Before we dive into this shocking story, let me know where you're watching from. If you believe in justice and standing up against discrimination, hit that like button and subscribe to stay updated on more incredible true stories of everyday heroes fighting back against powerful systems. Imani Wright wasn't supposed to make it this far. Growing up in the rough South Chicago neighborhoods where gunshots often replaced alarm clocks, her single mother worked 3 jobs to keep food on the table. Despite attending underfunded schools, with metal detectors instead of proper textbooks, young Imani showed extraordinary aptitude for mathematics, solving complex equations that left her teachers speechless. "Numbers don't care about your skin color," her mother would say. "They only care if you get them right." And Imani always got them right. By 16, she'd earned a full scholarship to Princeton, where she graduated top of her class despite being the only black woman in the economics department. Her roommate's parents once mistook her for the cleaning staff. The economics professor, who initially refused to believe her paper was original work, later wrote her recommendation for Harvard Business School. Through it all, Imani kept her mother's words close. "They'll doubt you twice as much, so be 3 times as good." At 34, Dr. Imani Wright had become something of a legend in financial circles. As the youngest and only black female senior portfolio manager at Legacy Capital Group, she managed a staggering $4 billion investment fund. Her analytical models had consistently outperformed market averages by 12% annually, earning her both admirers and enemies in an industry still dominated by white men who'd inherited their positions through family connections. As she packed for her San Francisco trip, Imani meticulously selected her wardrobe. The navy Armani suit, the subtle pearl earrings, the straightened hair. Every element calculated to project competence and minimize her otherness in rooms where she was often the only black face. Tomorrow's meeting with Horizon Technologies would be the culmination of 6 months of work. The acquisition would not only transform Legacy Capital's portfolio, but cement Imani's reputation as the firm's rising star. Her assistant Marcus appeared in her office doorway. "Car's waiting downstairs, Dr. Wright." And the CEO of Horizon just confirmed tomorrow's meeting. Everyone's excited to finally meet the brilliant mind behind this deal. Imani nodded, slipping her presentation into her designer briefcase. "This deal changes everything, Marcus. Not just for Legacy, but for me. Board membership could be next. Something she'd fought for since watching her mother struggle through a system designed to keep people like them working 3 minimum wage jobs until their bodies gave out." As she rode the elevator down, Imani received a text from Legacy's CEO. "Marcus Reynolds, don't mess this up. Board's watching. Make us proud." The subtext was clear. As the firm's diversity hire poster child, her failures would reflect on every minority employee who came after her. The pressure was immense, but Imani had never buckled under pressure. In the back seat of the town car heading to the airport, Imani reviewed the acquisition numbers one final time. $4 billion under her direct authority. The deal would increase Legacy's market share by 20% overnight and potentially revolutionize their tech investment strategy. As the Manhattan skyline faded behind her, Imani allowed herself a rare moment of optimism. After a lifetime of fighting twice as hard for half the recognition, tomorrow would finally be her crowning achievement. The day Imani Wright's name would be permanently etched into Wall Street history. Little did she know that within 24 hours, her name would indeed make headlines, but for reasons she could never have anticipated. Imani Wright strode confidently through the priority boarding lane at JFK International, her first-class ticket to San Francisco clutched in her hand. Atlantic Airline's Flight 2453 would be her floating office for the next 6 hours as she put the finishing touches on tomorrow's presentation. Her Legacy Capital Platinum card had earned her premier status, guaranteeing the quiet and space she needed to prepare. "Good afternoon, Dr. Wright," the gate agent smiled, scanning her ticket. "Enjoy your flight." The first-class cabin welcomed her with the familiar smell of leather seats and complimentary champagne. Imani stowed her briefcase, settled into seat 3A, and declined the pre-takeoff beverage. She needed perfect clarity for her work. "Excuse me, I think you're in my seat." Imani looked up to see a white man in his 50s, wearing a golf shirt that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. "I'm in 3A, Imani replied politely, showing her ticket. The man, who would later identify himself as Brad Whitman, CEO of a mid-sized construction company, glanced at her ticket with obvious skepticism. Must be a mistake. I always get window seats." He reluctantly shuffled to 3B beside her, muttering something under his breath that Imani chose to ignore. When flight attendant Trevor Sanders began the first-class drink service, Imani noticed something odd. Despite being one of the first passengers seated, she was repeatedly passed. "Excuse me," she finally said after her third attempt to get his attention. "Could I please get a water?" Trevor's smile didn't reach his eyes. "I'll get to you when I can." 20 minutes later, every white passenger had been served while Imani's tray table remained empty. When she pressed her call button, Trevor returned, with visible annoyance. "Yes?" he asked curtly. "I still haven't received any service," Imani explained calmly. Brad Whitman shifted in his seat. "Maybe if you weren't so demanding, you'd get better service," he said loudly enough for nearby passengers to hear. "Some people just don't know how to act in first class." The implication was clear, and Imani felt the familiar sting of racism wrapped in plausible deniability. She'd experienced this her entire career. People questioning her presence in spaces they believed she didn't belong. "I simply asked for water after waiting 20 minutes, Imani responded, maintaining her professional composure. Trevor crossed his arms. "I don't appreciate your tone." "My tone? I haven't raised my voice or been impolite in any way." Brad interjected. "She's been hostile since boarding. I've been feeling uncomfortable sitting next to her." Something inside Imani snapped, not in an emotional outburst, but in the cool, calculating realization that this was happening again, and no amount of credentials, designer clothes, or professional accomplishments could shield her from it. "I would like to speak to your supervisor," Imani stated firmly to Trevor. "She just threatened me," Trevor announced loudly. "Did everyone hear that? I feel unsafe." The absurdity of a 5'6" professional woman in a business suit somehow threatening this man would have been laughable if it weren't so infuriating. Before Imani could respond, Trevor was on the phone with security. Minutes later, 3 security officers boarded the plane and approached her seat. "Ma'am, we need you to gather your belongings and come with us," the lead officer stated. "There must be some mistake," Imani explained, maintaining her composure. "I'm Dr. Imani Wright, Senior Portfolio Manager at Legacy Capital. I have an extremely important meeting in San Francisco tomorrow morning." "I've done nothing wrong," Brad Whitman smirked. "Playing the race card won't help you now." As security began forcibly removing her, Imani's desperation mounted. "Please, check the security footage. I've done nothing threatening. This is a critical business trip involving billions in investments." Passengers recorded the incident on their phones as Imani was dragged down the aisle, her protests falling on deaf ears. Not a single person intervened. Her final glimpse before exiting the plane was Trevor's satisfied expression and Brad Whitman spreading comfortably into her vacated seat. Have you ever been in a situation where you were treated differently because of how you look? Comment number 1 if you've experienced discrimination in a public place. Hit like if you believe everyone deserves respect, regardless of their skin color or background. And subscribe if you want to see more stories about people fighting back against injustice. What would you do if you were in Imani's position? How does someone recover from such a public humiliation when the system seems stacked against them? And what could possibly happen next that would turn this nightmare into a $4 billion revenge story? Let's continue. Abandoned at the terminal gate, Imani Wright stood frozen as Flight 2453 departed without her. Her perfectly pressed Armani suit couldn't mask the humiliation burning through her veins. Airport personnel avoided eye contact as if her unjust removal was somehow contagious. Her phone vibrated incessantly with notifications as video of her forcible ejection spread across social media platforms like wildfire. Trembling with contained rage, Imani called Marcus Reynolds, Legacy Capital's CEO. "Marcus, there's been an incident. I won't make the Horizon meeting tomorrow." "What?" "Imani, we've been working on this acquisition for months. The board members flew in specifically to meet you. What happened?" As she explained, his tone shifted from concern to disappointment. "This is unfortunate timing. Do you think perhaps you overreacted? First-class flight attendants can be snippy with everyone. I was forcibly removed from a plane for requesting water, Marcus. The white passenger next to me claimed he felt threatened by my existence. This wasn't about customer service." A long pause. "I see. Well, I'll have to send Jason in your place. Not ideal, but he's familiar enough with the numbers." Jason Harper, her white male junior colleague who'd been trying to undermine her position for years. The same Jason who'd once presented her research as his own at a board meeting. Before she could protest, Reynolds continued. "Handle this situation discreetly, Imani. Legacy doesn't need controversy right now. We're in delicate negotiations with several conservative investment groups. Translation: your racial discrimination complaint is inconvenient for our bottom line." As the call ended, Imani's phone pinged with a notification. The first viral video had already reached 100,000 views, hashtagged #angry black woman on plane. Comments poured in, most assuming she must have done something to deserve removal. "They don't drag people off planes for nothing," seemed to be the prevailing wisdom, despite countless examples proving otherwise. 3 hours later, Atlantic Airlines released their statement. "Atlantic Airlines is committed to passenger safety. Our crew made the difficult decision to remove a disruptive passenger after she repeatedly violated crew instructions and created an uncomfortable environment for other passengers. We stand by our dedicated flight personnel who work tirelessly to ensure safe travels for all." Not a single word of it was true. By evening, Imani sat in her hotel room watching cable news pundits debate her character without knowing a single fact about her. One commentator suggested she'd been intoxicated. Another speculated about mental health issues. A conservative analyst questioned why these people always play the race card instead of following simple rules. Her phone rang again. It was Zara Thompson, the high-powered civil rights attorney whose contact information had been forwarded by a concerned colleague. "Dr. Wright, I've seen the videos. This is textbook discrimination with significant professional damages. Atlantic Airlines picked the wrong woman to mistreat." "They're painting me as the aggressor," Imani said quietly. "My own company seems more concerned about optics than justice." "That's how the playbook works," Zara replied. "Character assassination first, gaslight the victim second, wait for public attention to fade third. But they don't realize who they're dealing with. A woman of your stature and resources changes the equation." As they spoke, Imani's email pinged with Atlantic Airlines' generous offer of a $500 travel voucher for her inconvenience, along with a liability waiver she would need to sign. "They think this is going away with $500. Imani laughed bitterly. "They have no idea who I am." That night, unable to sleep, Imani opened her laptop and began researching Atlantic Airlines' corporate structure. Who owned it? Who invested in it? What were their vulnerabilities? As a portfolio manager controlling billions in assets, she had access to financial information most discrimination victims could only dream of. By morning, the Horizon Technologies deal had proceeded without her. Jason Harper was being praised for stepping up to fill her shoes. Meanwhile, social media had further twisted the narrative, with edited versions of the video making it appear Imani had been shouting when she'd never raised her voice. Atlantic Airlines stock actually rose 2 points following the incident, with analysts praising their firm stance on passenger compliance. The company announced they were unable to locate the security footage from the flight, despite multiple requests. Beneath her professional exterior, something had fundamentally changed in Imani Wright. The lifetime of small indignities, microaggressions, and blatant discrimination had culminated in this very public humiliation. But unlike previous incidents she'd swallowed for the sake of her career, this time she possessed something her opponents didn't realize: unprecedented financial leverage, and the absolute determination to use it. As she closed her laptop that morning, a notification appeared from Trevor Sanders' Facebook page. Some people think money makes them above the rules. Had to remove an entitled passenger today. First class is a privilege, not a right. Hundreds of supportive comments followed, none questioning his version of events. Imani's phone rang. It was her attorney. Atlantic's legal team wants to discuss settlement options. They're starting at $50,000 if you sign an NDA. Tell them, Imani said with newfound clarity, that they couldn't afford what this will eventually cost them, and it won't be measured in thousands. What no one yet realized was that Imani Wright wasn't just fighting for herself anymore. She was positioning to change an entire industry, and it would start with making Atlantic Airlines regret the day they'd chosen the wrong black woman to humiliate. Attorney Zara Thompson's downtown office overlooked the Manhattan skyline, a view that typically impressed clients. But Imani Wright barely noticed as she spread documents across the mahogany conference table. "You've been busy," Zara observed, scanning the meticulously organized research. "I'm a portfolio manager. Research is what I do." Imani pointed to a graph. Atlantic Airlines has 27 discrimination complaints filed in the past 18 months. 18 involved passengers of color. None resulted in meaningful consequences. Zara nodded. Classic pattern and practice case, but corporations this size budget for lawsuits. They'll offer 6 figures to avoid discovery, maybe 7 if we push hard. I'm not interested in a settlement. Imani pulled up another document. This is where it gets interesting. Legacy Capital, my firm, holds approximately $4 billion in Atlantic Airlines stock and bonds through various portfolios. And guess who manages those investments? Understanding dawned on Zara's face. You control the investments. Not officially, but yes. My direct portfolio includes these holdings, and my investment recommendations carry significant weight. Atlantic doesn't know this connection exists. Over the next 3 hours, they crafted a multifaceted strategy that went far beyond typical legal recourse. While Zara would pursue legal channels, Imani would work behind the scenes, building a case for divesting Legacy Capital's massive holdings in Atlantic Airlines. The key is timing, Imani explained. We need the legal pressure to reach its peak simultaneously with the financial threat. But first, we need more ammunition. Through professional networks, Imani quietly connected with former Atlantic employees, willing to speak about the airline's toxic culture. A flight attendant described mandatory training on how to identify problem passengers, using criteria that disproportionately targeted people of color. A baggage handler revealed internal communications praising staff who maintained passenger quality standards by flagging out-of-place travelers for extra scrutiny. Meanwhile, Atlantic Airlines CEO Richard Sinclair appeared on Business Today, dismissing the incident with rehearsed concern. While we can't comment on specific cases, Atlantic has zero tolerance for discrimination. Our diverse team members are our greatest asset. The interviewer failed to mention that Atlantic's executive team included 0 people of color, and their board had only 1 diversity member who hadn't attended a meeting in 3 years. As the interview aired, Imani received a text from her. "Assistant, Reynolds wants to see you. Tomorrow, 9 a.m. Her boss was finally ready to discuss the incident. That same day, Atlantic's stock climbed another point after announcing expanded routes to Asia. Investors remained unconcerned about the viral video that was gradually fading from public consciousness. The company's statement that security footage was unfortunately unavailable due to technical issues went largely unchallenged by mainstream media. Inside Legacy Capital's imposing headquarters, CEO Marcus Reynolds' corner office projected power and old money. Family photos showed generations of wealthy white men standing beside golf courses and yachts. "Imani, take a seat." Reynolds gestured vaguely. This unfortunate airline situation seems to be escalating. I've heard you've retained counsel. I have. While I sympathize with your experience, Legacy Capital needs to consider our institutional relationships. Atlantic Airlines is not just our investment, they're a partner in several ventures. Imani maintained her professional mask. With respect, I was publicly humiliated because of my race. This isn't about hurt feelings, it's about basic dignity. Reynolds sighed with practiced concern. No one's questioning what happened, but pursuing this aggressively could damage your career trajectory. The board was quite impressed with Jason's handling of the Horizon deal in your absence. Sometimes stepping back is the wisest choice. The threat was clear. Drop the case or lose your career advancement. I appreciate your concern for my career, Imani replied evenly. I'll certainly consider how best to proceed. What Reynolds didn't know was that Imani had already begun reviewing Legacy's investment guidelines. As portfolio manager, she had significant latitude in investment decisions based on ESG criteria, environmental, social, and governance factors. Discriminatory practices clearly violated the social component. She was building the case for divestment while appearing to retreat. That evening, as she compiled her analysis, she received an unexpected email from an anonymous address. I was on your flight. What they did was wrong. I have video from a different angle. The new footage clearly showed Imani remaining calm and professional throughout the incident, definitively disproving the airline's claims of disruptive behavior. More importantly, it captured Brad Whitman saying to Trevor, "First class isn't for everyone, if you know what I mean," while gesturing toward Imani before the confrontation began. As pieces fell into place, Imani made a bold decision. Rather than rushing forward, she would temporarily appear to accept defeat. She canceled her scheduled CNN interview and declined comment to several major publications, creating the impression she had backed down. Atlantic Airlines' PR team celebrated their apparent victory. CEO Richard Sinclair was overheard at a charity gala saying, "These problems go away if you hold the line. No one has the stamina for prolonged outrage anymore." He couldn't have been more wrong. Behind her calculated public retreat, Imani Wright was assembling financial evidence showing how Atlantic Airlines' discriminatory culture created material investment risk. She documented patterns of legal settlements, staff turnover costs, and customer alienation that collectively undermined shareholder value. By the 3-week mark, most social media had moved on to newer controversies. Atlantic Airlines had weathered what they believed was a minor public relations storm. Richard Sinclair received a 7-figure bonus for crisis management excellence. What no one outside Imani's inner circle realized was that the real storm hadn't even begun. The airline's apparent victory was exactly what Imani had strategically engineered. While they celebrated, she was building a financial case that would make her personal legal battle look like a mere thunder shower compared to the hurricane about to hit their balance sheet. And deep in Atlantic's financial structure, she'd discovered a vulnerability no one else had noticed, one that would transform her $4 billion leverage into a weapon of corporate destruction more powerful than anyone could have anticipated. "You don't know me, but I was in seat 4C on your flight." Imani stared at the white woman standing nervously in the Legacy Capital lobby. Jessica Winters, according to the visitor badge, clutched her purse as she continued in a hushed voice. "I recorded everything. The flight attendant and that businessman were completely out of line. I felt sick about not speaking up ever since." This unexpected ally had contacted Imani through LinkedIn, offering her unedited video showing Trevor's deliberate provocation and Brad Whitman's racist commentary preceding the incident. Unlike the viral clip circulating online, Jessica's footage captured critical moments before the confrontation. "Why come forward now?" Imani asked cautiously. Jessica shifted uncomfortably. "I was scared of backlash. I have kids, a mortgage. But I couldn't sleep knowing what really happened while everyone believes their lies." Jessica wasn't the only one finding courage. Within days of their meeting, Imani received messages from 3 other passengers offering statements about what they witnessed. Meanwhile, the Minority Travel Association had reached out offering organizational support, and several black executives from competing financial firms expressed solidarity privately, though few would do so publicly. As allies emerged, so did the full force of opposition. Atlantic Airlines deployed their crisis management team with ruthless efficiency. Trevor Sanders and Brad Whitman gave a joint interview to National Morning News, portraying themselves as victims of cancel culture. "She was argumentative from the moment she boarded," Trevor claimed, his practiced expression conveying sincerity. "When I asked her to comply with simple requests, she became confrontational. As flight attendants, our first responsibility is passenger safety." Brad Whitman, presented as an innocent bystander, nodded solemnly. "I actually feared for my safety. Her demeanor was extremely aggressive. I've never experienced anything like it in my 30 years of business travel." The interviewer never questioned what simple requests Trevor had made or how a seated professional woman could pose a physical threat to a businessman. Instead, they displayed heavily edited clips supporting the airline's narrative. Behind the scenes, the pressure intensified. Atlantic Airlines Employee Relations Department issued a memorandum to all staff. In light of recent events, employees are reminded that all interactions with media must be cleared through corporate communications. Unauthorized discussions about passenger incidents violate company policy and may result in immediate termination. The Flight Attendants Union initially released a statement supporting Trevor's actions. "Our members must make split-second decisions to ensure cabin security. We stand by our colleague who acted according to protocol." However, internal division quickly emerged when several black flight attendants questioned what protocol justified Trevor's behavior. As public attention seemingly waned, the private battle escalated. Imani began receiving death threats and racist messages on all her social media accounts. Her personal address was posted on extremist forums. Legacy Capital provided temporary security, but suggested the expense was unsustainable for an internal matter. Inside Legacy, the corporate betrayal deepened. Colleagues who had once sought her financial expertise now avoided eye contact in hallways. Executive management excluded her from key meetings regarding the very portfolios she managed. The message was clear. She was becoming a liability. "They're trying to isolate you," Zara advised during their private strategy session. "It's textbook corporate retaliation. They can't fire you explicitly for filing a discrimination claim, so they'll create conditions making your position untenable." Imani nodded, unsurprised. Meanwhile, Atlantic's legal team sent a settlement offer with an ironclad NDA, $200,000 to disappear quietly. "Which you're declining." "Of course, but we need something substantial before we can proceed with Phase 2. Imani paused as her phone buzzed with an incoming message. Her eyes widened as she read it. "What is it?" Zara asked. "An anonymous email from someone claiming to be an Atlantic Airlines IT manager. They say they saved the original security footage before it was deleted, and they're willing to provide it confidentially." The contact arranged an encrypted transfer of files showing the complete, unedited incident from multiple cabin angles. The footage irrefutably demonstrated Trevor's discriminatory service pattern and captured audio of Brad Whitman saying, "These affirmative action types always act entitled. First class has standards." As Imani added this crucial evidence to her arsenal, a new threat emerged. Legacy Capital scheduled an emergency meeting to discuss portfolio realignment, specifically targeting the investments under her management. The proposal, drafted by Jason Harper, recommended transferring Atlantic Airlines holdings to a different manager due to potential conflict of interest concerns. The corporate walls were closing in, but they had underestimated both Imani's strategic foresight and her determination. While they plotted her professional isolation, she had been meticulously documenting every retaliatory action, building a separate employment case against Legacy. More importantly, she had discovered that CEO Marcus Reynolds sat on a subsidiary board with Richard Sinclair, Atlantic's CEO, creating a clear conflict of interest that he had never disclosed. Just as Legacy prepared to strip her investment authority, Imani quietly secured digital evidence of her contractual rights over the portfolio. Her employment agreement specifically prohibited reassignment of her managed assets without documented performance failures, of which there were none. In fact, Her investments had outperformed all other legacy portfolios for 3 consecutive years. The final piece fell into place when Imani uncovered the connection she'd been searching for. Reynolds' son-in-law was a major shareholder in a private aviation company that would directly benefit if Atlantic Airlines faced significant devaluation. "They're not just protecting Atlantic," Imani told Zara as they reviewed the evidence. "They're positioning to profit from its downfall, but only after easing me out and ensuring I can't control the timing." As tensions escalated, Legacy's ultimatum arrived via a carefully worded email from Human Resources. Imani would take a voluntary paid leave of absence, while an internal review determined appropriate portfolio management moving forward. The subtext was unmistakable. Drop the discrimination case or lose everything she'd worked for. To all appearances, Imani Wright had been outmaneuvered by the combined forces of Atlantic Airlines and her own employer. As she packed her office, belongings under supervision, colleagues whispered that her promising career had been derailed by overreacting to what they characterized as a minor customer service incident. What they failed to understand was that this apparent defeat was exactly what Imani had anticipated. While appearing to be crushed by the system, she had actually maneuvered her opponents into creating the perfect conditions for her counterattack. Have you ever been betrayed by the very people who should have supported you? Comment number 1 if you've experienced workplace betrayal when standing up for what's right. Hit the like button if you believe that sometimes you have to lose the battle to win the war. And subscribe if you want to see more stories about strategic comebacks against overwhelming odds. How will Imani turn this apparent defeat into victory? What hidden leverage could possibly save her career and hold an entire airline accountable? And who will stand with her when everyone seems to have abandoned her cause? Stay tuned as this $4 billion battle reaches its next explosive phase. The board has concerns about your judgment, Imani. Marcus Reynolds leaned back in his leather chair, fingers steepled in practiced concern. The Legacy Capital boardroom, with its mahogany paneling and oil paintings of former chairmen, had always symbolized the old money power Imani had fought to access. Now it felt like an elaborate trap. "My judgment?" she repeated. "My portfolio has outperformed market averages by double digits for 3 consecutive years. This isn't about your financial acumen." Reynolds glanced at the other executives, flanking him. "It's about your decision to pursue a personal vendetta against a major corporate partner. The Atlantic Airlines situation has become problematic." General Counsel William Porter cleared his throat. "The potential conflicts of interest are substantial. As your employer, we have fiduciary obligations to consider." The subtext was clear. Imani's discrimination case threatened Legacy's business, relationships. Principles were expendable when profits were at stake. "We believe a leave of absence would be appropriate while we reassess portfolio assignments," Reynolds continued. "Jason Harper has already demonstrated his capability with the Horizon acquisition. He's prepared to assume temporary management of your accounts." Imani maintained her professional composure while rage simmered beneath. "My contract explicitly prevents reassignment without documented performance issues. Are you suggesting my performance is inadequate?" Porter shifted uncomfortably. "This is about reputation risk, not performance metrics." "My reputation or Legacy's?" Imani asked pointedly. Reynolds's practiced smile vanished. "Both are inextricably linked, which you seem to have forgotten. The board expects employees to place company interests first." As the meeting concluded, Imani returned to her office to find IT specialists already restricting her system access. Her executive assistant avoided eye contact while delivering the news that her meetings for the week had been temporarily reassigned. The whisper campaign had already begun. Colleagues who'd celebrated her successes now questioned her emotional stability. An internal memo accidentally copied to her email thread characterized her as increasingly erratic following the unfortunate Airline incident. That afternoon, Imani discovered her Bloomberg terminal access had been limited, preventing her from executing certain transactions within her portfolio. When she questioned the IT department, they referenced a security protocol that had never previously existed. The final betrayal came that evening when she overheard Jason Harper in the executive lounge. "Between us, Reynolds says the Atlantic Airlines situation is perfect timing. They've wanted to move her investments to the aggressive growth strategy for months. but her contract was too tight. Now they have cause. Imani realized the discrimination incident hadn't just been inconvenient for Legacy. They were weaponizing it to seize control of her successful portfolio and implementation strategies. Working late into the night, Imani accessed her employment agreement through personal backups, confirming what she already knew. Any attempt to reassign her portfolio without cause constituted constructive termination with substantial penalties. More importantly, her contract included a rarely used provision granting her 15 days to contest any reassignment before it became effective. Those 15 days would make all the difference. As she gathered evidence of the coordinated effort to force her out, Imani discovered something even more damning. CEO Marcus Reynolds' family trust held significant positions in Pinnacle Aviation, Atlantic Airlines' largest competitor. If Atlantic's stock declined following a discrimination scandal, Pinnacle would directly benefit. Reynolds hadn't just abandoned her discrimination claim. He was positioned to profit from it if revealed at a time of his choosing. The next morning, Legacy's Human Resources Director delivered the expected news. The Executive Committee has approved your paid administrative leave effective immediately. All portfolio responsibilities will transfer to Jason Harper pending review. I understand, Imani replied with deliberate calm. I'll need access to clear personal items from my office. Under security escort, she packed her belongings while colleagues watched through glass walls. The walk of shame was meticulously choreographed to send a message throughout the firm. This is what happens when you challenge the system. What Legacy failed to realize was that their betrayal had freed Imani from the last restraints of corporate loyalty. As she left the building carrying a cardboard box of personal effects, the humiliation was real, but so was her determination. The 15-day contestation period was all she needed to execute the next phase of her strategy. From her home office, using personal devices untraceable to Legacy, Imani sent a secured message to her attorney. They took the bait, proceeding with Phase 2. While Legacy believed they had neutralized her, Imani activated the network she'd been quietly building. A senior partner at competing firm Diamondback Investments responded to her discreet inquiry within hours. Our Diversity Initiative Committee would welcome your presentation regarding potential investment opportunities. By week's end, Imani had secured confidential meetings with 3 major investment firms, all intrigued by her unique insight into Atlantic Airlines' vulnerabilities. Meanwhile, she filed formal contestation of her portfolio reassignment, forcing Legacy into a procedural timeline that would prevent them from making irrevocable investment changes before her plan culminated. The corporate betrayal designed to silence her had instead removed the only obstacle preventing Imani from approaching Atlantic's competitors. No longer bound by Legacy's conflicts of interest, she was now free to reveal the airline's structural weaknesses to potential investment partners looking to capitalize on Atlantic's impending crisis. As Legacy celebrated their seemingly successful suppression of a problem employee, they remained unaware that Imani Wright had anticipated their betrayal and incorporated it into her master strategy. Their victory celebration would be short-lived. 3 a.m. found Imani Wright surrounded by stacks of legal documents in her home office. Sleep had become a luxury she could no longer afford as the contestation deadline approached. Somewhere in the hundreds of pages of her employment contract lay the key to maintaining control of her portfolio despite Legacy's determination to reassign it. Found it, she whispered, highlighting a critical paragraph in her original hiring agreement. When Zara arrived for their emergency strategy session the following morning, Imani was already on her 3rd cup of coffee, but radiating confidence. Legacy overlooked something critical, Imani explained, presenting the highlighted document. My contract includes an obscure provision regarding investment authority, originally included for emergency situations where I might become incapacitated. In such cases, any investment exceeding $1 billion requires my explicit authorization or documented incapacity for reassignment. Zara examined the clause. And Atlantic Airlines falls under this threshold? $4 billion, Imani confirmed. They can reassign everything else but not Atlantic without my signature or a formal finding of incapacity, which would require independent medical evaluation. The provision created a 15-day window during which Imani retained final authority, over any major Atlantic Airlines investment decisions, regardless of her leave status. It was the leverage she needed to execute the next phase of her plan. Meanwhile, Imani's quiet networking had yielded unexpected allies. 3 former Atlantic Airlines passengers of color had contacted her attorney with similar discrimination stories after seeing her case mentioned in industry news. None had Imani's resources to fight back, but collectively their experiences established a pattern of behavior that strengthened her case. "We're not just fighting for you anymore," Zara reminded her. "You've become the voice for everyone who couldn't fight back." The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. An anonymous whistleblower using encrypted communications provided Imani with internal Atlantic Airlines documents revealing a troubling training module. The material explicitly instructed flight attendants to provide enhanced scrutiny to passengers who appear inconsistent with typical first-class demographics, thinly veiled code for racial profiling. More damning still was an internal email from Trevor Sanders to his supervisor 3 days before Imani's flight. Tired of these diversity hires thinking first class is their right, someone needs to remind them of their place. As evidence mounted, Imani arranged confidential meetings with prominent minority-owned investment firms historically excluded from major airline financing. Her pitch was straightforward. When Atlantic Airlines faced inevitable devaluation following exposure of their discriminatory practices, these firms could position themselves for strategic acquisition of devalued shares while supporting the cause of corporate accountability. Luminous Capital, a Black-owned investment firm with over $12 billion in managed assets, expressed particular interest. "We've wanted entry into the airline sector for years," their managing director explained. "But the old boys network has kept us marginalized. Your insight provides the opening we've been waiting for." While building external alliances, Imani discovered something that transformed her strategy entirely. Deep in Atlantic Airlines' public financial disclosures was a vulnerability no one had noticed. Their liquidity depended heavily on a specific bond arrangement that included a moral conduct clause. Systematic discrimination could trigger a technical default, potentially forcing immediate repayment of billions in financing. This discovery coincided with another breakthrough. The anonymous source who had provided the unedited security footage finally revealed their identity. Carlos Vega, Atlantic's IT security director, who had grown increasingly uncomfortable with the company's handling of the incident. "They instructed me to permanently delete all footage," Carlos explained during their secured call. "When I questioned the legality, they threatened my job. That's when I knew I had to preserve the evidence." Carlos also revealed that Brad Whitman wasn't just a random passenger. His construction company held major contracts for Atlantic's terminal renovations, and he regularly received preferential treatment from crew members like Trevor. Armed with mounting evidence, Imani spent the final days of her 15-day window finalizing her strategy. She contacted several institutional investors with significant Atlantic Airlines holdings, sharing carefully selected evidence of the airline's discriminatory practices and the financial risks they posed. Though none committed immediately to divestment, several expressed serious concerns about Atlantic's governance. On day 14, as Legacy Capital prepared to finalize her portfolio reassignment, Imani received confirmation of the final piece in her strategy. Luminous Capital had secured backing from a consortium of minority-owned investment firms ready to acquire strategic positions in Atlantic Airlines when the inevitable devaluation occurred. That evening, Imani sent a cryptic message to Zara. "All pieces in position. Tomorrow we break silence." Legacy Capital awakened the next morning to news that would shatter their carefully constructed narrative. Imani Wright, the employee they believed they had successfully silenced, had just become their worst nightmare. While appearing defeated, she had built a coalition capable of executing the most sophisticated financial response to discrimination in corporate history. What Atlantic Airlines and Legacy Capital failed to understand was that in attempting to crush Imani Wright, they had inadvertently created the perfect conditions for her to demonstrate exactly why she had risen to control a $4 billion portfolio in the first place. Her financial brilliance, combined with unwavering moral clarity, had transformed personal humiliation into leverage that would soon reshape an entire industry. The countdown to financial reckoning had begun, and neither Atlantic Airlines nor Legacy Capital saw it coming. Atlantic Airlines launches diversity initiative while facing discrimination allegations, the Wall Street Journal headline read. The airline's desperate attempt at damage control had begun. After weeks of relative media silence, Imani Wright had strategically released select evidence to key financial journalists, reigniting public interest in the discrimination case. Atlantic Airlines' response was swift and aggressive, a comprehensive PR campaign portraying the incident as an unfortunate misunderstanding blown out of proportion by an emotionally distraught passenger. Atlantic Airlines values diversity and inclusion, CEO Richard Sinclair declared in a hastily organized press conference. We're proud to announce a $10 million commitment to sensitivity training for all customer-facing staff. The announcement, clearly timed to preempt Imani's media reemergence, included staged photos of Sinclair with the airline's few minority employees. Behind the scenes, Atlantic deployed more sinister tactics. Imani discovered hundreds of newly created social media accounts simultaneously posting identical criticisms of her character and professionalism. Digital forensics traced the coordinated attack to a reputation management firm on Atlantic's payroll. They've hired professional trolls, Zara confirmed after consulting with her digital security team. Classic corporate astroturfing to create the illusion of public opinion. These manufactured accounts spread fabricated stories about Imani's supposed history of complaints, false allegations of previous lawsuits, and baseless claims about her professional conduct. One particularly vicious narrative suggested she had orchestrated the entire incident as a publicity stunt to advance her career. The airline's desperation became evident when they suddenly discovered new security footage that had been misplaced during routine server maintenance. The heavily edited clips showed only Imani's reaction to Trevor's provocations, completely omitting the discriminatory treatment that preceded it. Atlantic Airlines leveraged their extensive marketing relationships to amplify their narrative. Several high-profile social media influencers mysteriously began posting supportive content about the airline's commitment to passenger safety and questioning why one person's complaint deserved ongoing attention. The financial press, traditionally Imani's professional home turf, became another battleground. Industry publications ran articles questioning whether investment managers should bring personal grievances into professional decisions. Without naming Imani directly, these pieces established the groundwork to discredit any financial action she might take against the airline. Legacy Capital seized the opportunity to further undermine her credibility, releasing a carefully worded statement. While we respect all employees' right to pursue personal legal matters, Legacy Capital remains committed to objective investment, decisions based solely on financial metrics and shareholder value. The subtext was clear. Imani's discrimination claims were personal rather than indicative of material corporate misconduct. Under this coordinated assault, even Imani's most loyal supporters began questioning whether continuing the fight was worth the professional destruction she was experiencing. Her reputation, meticulously built over decades of exceptional performance, was being systematically dismantled through corporate machinery designed to exhaust and isolate individual challengers. This is their endgame, Imani told Zara during a secure call. They're betting I'll accept a settlement rather than endure ongoing character assassination. Many would, Zara acknowledged. The personal cost is enormous. They picked the wrong opponent. Imani's voice carried newfound resolve. Everything they're doing is predictable and documentable. Each attack only strengthens our case while revealing their desperation. As if confirming her assessment, Atlantic Airlines increased their settlement offer to $1 million, still contingent on a comprehensive NDA that would prevent Imani from ever discussing the incident or the airline's response. While publicly appearing battered by the relentless PR assault, Imani quietly executed the next phase of her strategy. The 15-day window preventing Legacy from reassigning her Atlantic Airlines holdings was about to expire, but she had already secured the leverage needed to maintain effective control. Through encrypted channels, Imani provided detailed financial analysis to Luminous Capital and their consortium of minority-owned investment firms, demonstrating how Atlantic's discrimination issues created material risk to shareholder value. Meanwhile, She compiled evidence of Legacy's retaliatory actions, building a separate employment case that would prevent them from interfering with her investment authority without significant legal exposure. The tide began to turn when Carlos Vega, the IT security director who had preserved the unedited security footage, decided to go public. His whistleblower statement, accompanied by complete unedited video showing Trevor and Brad Whitman's coordinated discrimination, devastated Atlantic's manufactured narrative. Mainstream news outlets couldn't ignore the comprehensive footage showing Imani maintaining perfect composure while being subjected to increasingly obvious discrimination. Social media erupted with hot or boycott Atlantic hashtags as the unedited video spread across platforms. Atlantic Airlines stock dipped 3% following Carlos's revelation, triggering concerned calls from institutional investors. The airline's crisis team scrambled to contain the damage, offering Carlos a seven-figure settlement to recant his statement. His refusal, captured on a recorded call that promptly leaked, only accelerated the airline's credibility collapse. Legacy Capital, sensing the shifting momentum, attempted to distance themselves from their previous position. CEO Marcus Reynolds reached out to Imani with a conciliatory message suggesting her temporary leave could end if she would consider a mutually beneficial resolution to all outstanding issues. What none of her opponents yet realized was that Imani Wright had successfully weathered their most aggressive attacks while positioning all the pieces for her masterstroke. The public battle, while personally costly, had created the perfect conditions for the financial maneuver that would transform her individual fight into systemic change. As Atlantic Airlines leadership celebrated temporarily halting their stock decline with aggressive media manipulation, they remained oblivious to the financial tsunami Imani had engineered. Their victory celebration was about to be cut dramatically short. Have you ever watched someone underestimate a person they thought they could easily defeat? Comment number 1. If you've seen someone misjudge their opponent and face unexpected consequences. Hit the like button if you believe sometimes the best revenge is letting your opponents think they've won while you're planning your next move. And don't forget to subscribe if you want to see more stories about strategic brilliance triumphing over corporate power. What financial weapon could Imani possibly wield that would bring an entire airline to its knees? How will Legacy Capital react when they realize their betrayal has backfired spectacularly? And what will happen when Atlantic Airlines finally discovers exactly who they chose to discriminate against? The $4 billion reckoning is about to begin. The lawsuit landed on Atlantic Airlines' legal department at 9 a.m. sharp, but not the one they had anticipated. Instead of Imani Wright filing a discrimination claim against the airline, Atlantic's general counsel found themselves served with a preemptive lawsuit claiming defamation, intentional infliction of emotional distress, and corporate conspiracy against their own passenger. They're trying to control the narrative, Zara explained during their emergency strategy call. By filing first, they're positioning you as the defendant rather than the victim. Atlantic's legal filing painted Imani as an unstable, attention-seeking individual who had manufactured controversy for personal gain. The complaint included carefully selected still images from their edited security footage and sworn statements from Trevor Sanders and Brad Whitman characterizing her as threatening and aggressive. More troubling was the judge assigned to the case. The Honorable William Hargrove had previously represented airline interests as a corporate attorney and maintained close social connections with Richard Sinclair, Atlantic's CEO. His assignment was hardly coincidental. This is a strategic error on their part, Imani noted, reviewing the lawsuit. They've opened the door to discovery they can't control. Within hours, Zara filed a motion to recuse Judge Hargrove based on documented conflicts of interest, including photographs of him attending Sinclair's daughter's wedding 6 months earlier. Simultaneously, they filed a comprehensive countersuit in a different jurisdiction, ensuring Atlantic would be fighting a two-front legal battle. The airline's legal team, expecting to intimidate Imani into settlement, instead found themselves navigating complex procedural challenges. Each motion they filed was met with sophisticated counter-motions that created procedural quagmires, extending timelines and increasing public scrutiny. While legal teams exchanged filings, Carlos Vega's unedited security footage continued spreading across social media platforms. The full 30-minute sequence showed Trevor repeatedly ignoring Imani's requests while providing immediate service to white passengers. Most damning was the clear audio of Brad Whitman saying, "Some people need to learn their place isn't in first class," followed by Trevor's agreeing laughter. Atlantic Airlines' stock dropped another 4 points as Dark Atlantic discrimination trended nationwide. Investment analysts began questioning whether the controversy constituted material risk to shareholder value, exactly as Imani had anticipated. Desperate to regain control, Atlantic's legal team offered a settlement of $2 million, quadruple their previous offer. The proposal included a mutual non-disparagement clause and confidentiality agreement that would prevent public discussion of the incident by either party. "They're panicking," Zara observed. "This offer comes from fear, not goodwill." Imani declined without hesitation. "No amount of money will purchase my silence." This was never about personal compensation. Atlantic's next move revealed their growing desperation. Rather than addressing the discrimination claims directly, they deployed private investigators to scrutinize Imani's background, seeking any personal or professional impropriety that could diminish her credibility. Finding nothing substantive, they resorted to manufacturing controversy. Anonymous sources suddenly contacted financial publications, claiming Imani had engaged in questionable investment practices at Legacy Capital. Though entirely fabricated, these allegations required public denial, creating the very appearance of impropriety they sought to establish. Legacy Capital, still attempting to navigate their increasingly precarious position, released another carefully worded statement, neither fully supporting Imani nor entirely aligning with Atlantic. CEO Marcus Reynolds was walking a tightrope of his own making, unwilling to defend his employee yet increasingly concerned about potential blowback from her growing public support. The legal battle took an unexpected turn when diversity statistics for Atlantic Airlines were leaked to prominent financial publications. The data revealed that among 142 executive positions, only 3 were held by people of color, and none by Black women. Among first-class flight attendants, the statistics were equally damning. Less than 2% were Black, despite serving routes with diverse passenger demographics. As Atlantic scrambled to explain these disparities, former employees began speaking out about systematic discrimination within the company. A former HR director revealed that discrimination complaints were routinely buried to maintain the airline's public image, while employees who raised concerns faced subtle retaliation, leading to eventual resignation. Atlantic Airlines' stock dropped another 3 points as institutional investors began questioning the company's governance and risk management. Richard Sinclair called an emergency board meeting, presenting what he believed was a comprehensive solution: a $5 million diversity initiative, mandatory sensitivity training, and a revised settlement offer of $5 million to Imani with modified confidentiality provisions. What Atlantic failed to recognize was that each desperate maneuver further strengthened Imani's position while weakening their own. Every legal filing, PR statement, and settlement offer became additional evidence in her comprehensive case documenting systematic discrimination and corporate cover-up. Judge Hargrove reluctantly recused himself following mounting public pressure and evidence of his connections to Atlantic's leadership. His replacement, Judge Camila Rodriguez, had a reputation for meticulous adherence to procedural law and zero tolerance for discovery violations. In her first ruling, Judge Rodriguez ordered Atlantic Airlines to preserve and produce all communication related to the incident, including text messages, emails, and internal memos. The airline's request to limit discovery was firmly denied, opening the door to comprehensive investigation of their handling of discrimination complaints over the previous 5 years. As legal pressure mounted, Atlantic's competitors seized the opportunity to distance themselves from the controversy. Delta and United launched new marketing campaigns emphasizing their commitment to inclusive service, while smaller carriers offered special promotions to passengers who could prove they had canceled Atlantic flights. With their stock continuing to decline and public opinion solidifying against them, Atlantic Airlines made one final desperate attempt to settle before devastating discovery procedures began. Their offer: $10 million, no confidentiality requirements, a public apology, and Trevor's termination. It was their most generous proposal, and one that most discrimination victims would have eagerly accepted. But as Zara presented the offer, Imani's response remained unchanged. "They still don't understand," she said quietly. "This was never about money. It's about changing a system that treats people differently based on their skin color. 10 million doesn't change the system. It just buys their right to continue it." With settlement rejected and legal discovery proceeding, Atlantic Airlines found themselves exactly where Imani had strategically positioned them: publicly exposed, financially vulnerable, and completely unprepared for the financial chess game she was about to initiate. "You need to understand what happens next," Imani explained to Zara as they reviewed financial projections in her home office. "This moves beyond the legal realm into pure financial leverage." While Atlantic Airlines had focused exclusively on containing legal and public relations damage, they had overlooked Imani's most potent weapon: her sophisticated understanding of institutional investment dynamics and her still intact authority over Legacy Capital's $4 billion position in Atlantic. Despite her administrative leave, Legacy had failed to successfully transfer investment authority due to the contractual provisions Imani had identified. Their repeated attempts to circumvent these provisions had only strengthened her separate employment case against them, creating a legal stalemate that maintained her effective control. Imani's first move was subtle but significant. She initiated a routine portfolio review that required Atlantic Airlines to provide updated risk assessment documentation. This standard procedure raised no immediate alarms, but it established a formal record of potential ESG, environmental, social governance, concerns regarding Atlantic's discrimination issues. "ESG ratings impact institutional investment decisions," Imani explained to her growing coalition of minority-owned investment firms. "By documenting Atlantic's governance failures as material risks, we create legitimate financial justification for divestment decisions that might otherwise appear retaliatory." Meanwhile, Legacy Capital CEO Marcus Reynolds grew increasingly concerned about Imani's unexpected resilience. During an emergency executive committee meeting, the discussion turned heated. "How does she still maintain effective control over the Atlantic position?" Reynolds demanded. General Counsel William Porter shifted uncomfortably. "Her employment contract contains unusual provisions regarding investments exceeding $1 billion. She negotiated these terms during her initial hiring when we were desperate to attract diverse talent with her credentials. Frankly, we never expected to invoke these clauses. So she can simply pull $4 billion in investments despite being on administrative leave?" Reynolds' face reddened. "Not unilaterally," Porter clarified, "but she can prevent reassignment without proper cause, which we haven't established. Attempting to force the issue could trigger substantial penalties and strengthen her retaliation claims." As Legacy grappled with this contractual quagmire, Imani methodically built the financial case against Atlantic Airlines. She compiled comprehensive analysis demonstrating how the airline's discriminatory practices created material risks to shareholder value through potential legal liabilities, customer boycotts, and reputational damage affecting business partnerships. This analysis wasn't just for Legacy Capital. Through secure channels, she shared these findings with major institutional investors holding significant Atlantic Airlines positions. While not directly advocating divestment, she presented objective financial risks that fiduciaries could not responsibly ignore. Atlantic Airlines leadership remained oblivious to these behind-the-scenes financial maneuvers until Richard Sinclair received an unusual call from BlackRock, one of their largest institutional investors. "We're conducting a standard portfolio review," the BlackRock representative explained. "Recent events have raised questions about Atlantic's ESG compliance. Our fiduciary responsibility requires due diligence regarding these concerns." Similar inquiries followed from other major investors, creating a pattern that finally alerted Atlantic's CFO to the coordinated nature of these routine reviews. By the time they recognized the strategy, institutional investors representing over $30 billion in Atlantic Airlines holdings were actively reassessing their positions. Sinclair immediately convened an emergency board meeting, finally comprehending the financial threat beyond the public relations crisis. "This Wright woman isn't just fighting a discrimination case," he explained to stunned board members. "She's systematically undermining our institutional investor confidence." In desperation, Atlantic attempted to counter by approaching Legacy Capital directly, offering expanded partnership opportunities and exclusive route agreements in exchange for maintaining their investment position. Reynolds was receptive, seeing an opportunity to profit from the crisis while potentially neutralizing Imani's leverage. This backroom dealing might have succeeded if not for Imani's foresight. Anticipating exactly such collusion, she had already documented Reynolds' conflict of interest regarding his family trust's holdings in competing airlines. This evidence was now in the hands of Legacy's largest clients, who began questioning whether their investments were being managed with appropriate fiduciary responsibility. As institutional pressure mounted, Reynolds made a critical miscalculation. Attempting to finally wrest control of the Atlantic Airlines position from Imani, he ordered a forced portfolio reassignment citing emergency business necessity. This direct violation of her contractual protections provided the final evidence needed for her employment lawsuit against Legacy. While Legacy and Atlantic scrambled to contain the growing financial crisis, Imani executed her masterstroke. The consortium of minority-owned investment firms she had assembled was now perfectly positioned to acquire strategic positions in Atlantic Airlines as institutional investors began their careful exit. Atlantic's stock had already declined 20% from its pre-incident value, but the coordinated institutional reassessments triggered automated trading algorithms sensitive to unusual institutional activity. This technical selling pressure created the perfect entry point for Imani's consortium, allowing them to establish significant positions at deeply discounted valuations. Sinclair, finally recognizing the existential threat to both his company and career, made one desperate counterattack. Through banking relationships, Atlantic Airlines attempted to freeze assets related to the minority investment consortium, claiming market manipulation and conflicts of interest. This heavy-handed tactic briefly halted trading in Atlantic shares and seemed to momentarily derail Imani's strategy. Financial commentators speculated that the airline had finally found effective countermeasures against what one analyst called the most sophisticated financial response to discrimination in corporate history. For 24 hours, Atlantic's leadership celebrated what they believed was a successful defense. Their stock stabilized and institutional exits temporarily paused as regulatory questions circulated about the minority consortium's investment activities. What they failed to realize was that this apparent setback was precisely what Imani had anticipated. The regulatory scrutiny triggered by Atlantic's allegations required comprehensive disclosure of all parties' positions and conflicts, including Richard Sinclair's undisclosed stock sales during the crisis and Marcus Reynolds's competing airline investments. They've activated their own trap card, Imani told Zara, as the regulatory filings became public. Every defensive move they make only exposes more of their improper conduct. With Atlantic Airlines leadership now facing potential securities violations alongside discrimination claims, the stage was set for the final confrontation. The financial chess game had positioned all pieces precisely where Imani needed them for her endgame. A direct confrontation with the power structure that had believed her easily defeated. The Atlantic Airlines boardroom exuded power and privilege. 30 floors above Manhattan, floor-to-ceiling windows offered panoramic views of the city where financial decisions affecting millions were made daily by a handful of primarily white men in custom suits. As board members settled into Italian leather chairs for their emergency session, CEO Richard Sinclair attempted to project confidence despite the crisis engulfing his company. The stock had stabilized after their aggressive countermeasures against Imani Wright's investment consortium, and he believed the worst had passed. "Gentlemen," Sinclair began, deliberately ignoring the two women present, "we've weathered the storm. Our legal team has successfully delayed discovery proceedings. Our PR campaign has shifted public narrative, and our financial maneuvers have neutralized the immediate divestment threat." Board members nodded with cautious relief until Executive Assistant Jennifer Santos interrupted, something that simply didn't happen in this room. "Excuse me, Mr. Sinclair. There's someone here insisting on addressing the board." Sinclair frowned. "We're in an emergency session. Whoever it is can schedule proper." "It's Dr. Imani Wright," Jennifer interrupted again, her expression suggesting this wasn't a routine situation. "She's accompanied by representatives from Luminous Capital, Turner Investments, and Vanguard's ESG division." The room fell silent. Vanguard controlled over $50 billion in various Atlantic Airlines investment vehicles. "Show them in," directed Board Chairman William Drexel, overriding Sinclair's objection with a sharp glance. When Imani Wright entered the Atlantic Airlines boardroom, she no longer resembled the humiliated passenger dragged from their airplane months earlier. Immaculately dressed in a tailored suit that projected absolute confidence, she carried herself with the authority of someone who controlled billions in capital. Because she did. "Gentlemen, ladies," she acknowledged, taking an uninvited position at the head of the table. "I believe we have matters to discuss that can no longer be delegated to lawyers or PR firms." Sinclair attempted to regain control. "Dr. Wright, while we appreciate your theatrical entrance, this is a private board meeting. We're engaged in confidential company business." "Indeed you are," Imani agreed pleasantly. "The confidential business of systematic discrimination, evidence suppression, and securities violations. All matters I believe your shareholders would consider material to their investment decisions." She activated a presentation that appeared on the boardroom screens, displaying a comprehensive timeline of Atlantic's discriminatory practices, revealing internal communications never intended for public view. "How did you access these documents?" demanded Chief Legal Officer Robert Warner. "These weren't included in discovery." "They weren't," Imani confirmed. "But your flight attendant Trevor Sanders' text messages were less secure than he believed, particularly his exchanges with Brad Whitman coordinating my removal before I ever violated any policies." She advanced to the next slide, showing Trevor and Brad's complete message history, revealing their long-standing practice of targeting minority passengers for enhanced scrutiny in first class. "Mr. Sanders and Mr. Whitman are waiting outside," Imani continued. "I thought you might want to hear directly from them how this systematic behavior has been not merely tolerated, but encouraged by mid-level management." Another slide displayed emails from Atlantic's Customer Experience Director instructing cabin crews to ensure passenger demographics align with Atlantic's premium brand image. Thinly veiled code for racial filtering. "This is outrageous," Sinclair sputtered. "You've clearly violated numerous confidentiality provisions. Security, please escort Dr. Wright from the building." Before security could respond, the Vanguard representative intervened. "We'd prefer to hear the complete presentation before any hasty actions, Mr. Sinclair. As fiduciaries responsible for substantial Atlantic Airlines investments, we have legitimate concerns about these governance issues." Power in the room had visibly shifted. Sinclair's authority evaporated as institutional investors representing billions in capital aligned with Imani's position. "Perhaps most concerning," Imani continued, advancing to financial documentation, "is Atlantic's pattern of securities violations during this crisis. This slide shows Mr. Sinclair's stock sales immediately prior to public disclosure of discrimination allegations, potentially constituting illegal insider trading." The boardroom erupted in concerned murmurs as Sinclair's face drained of color. "That's a routine diversification strategy," he protested weakly, "totally independent of this incident." "Interesting timing for diversification," Imani observed, "particularly when coupled with your attempt to freeze legitimate minority investment in Atlantic while failing to disclose your own divestment." For the next 45 minutes, Imani methodically presented evidence that Atlantic Airlines had not merely discriminated against her individually, but maintained systematic practices that created material financial risks that had been deliberately concealed from shareholders and regulators. As her presentation concluded, she finally revealed her full leverage. "Legacy Capital controls $4 billion in Atlantic Airlines investments under my direct portfolio authority. Despite administrative leave, my contractual provisions prevent reassignment without due process, which hasn't occurred." She let this sink in before continuing. "Additionally, the minority investment consortium I've assembled now controls voting rights to approximately 12% of outstanding Atlantic Airlines shares following recent acquisitions at distressed valuations." Board Chairman Drexel leaned forward. "What exactly are you proposing, Dr. Wright?" "Comprehensive transformation," she replied without hesitation. "Atlantic Airlines will implement independently verified anti-discrimination protocols, establish proper oversight mechanisms, create meaningful diversity throughout management ranks, and provide substantial compensation to all passengers who've experienced similar discrimination. The cost would be astronomical, Sinclair protested. Shareholders would never approve such expenditures. I believe they would prefer it to the alternative, Imani responded calmly, which is the immediate divestment of $4 billion. In legacy capital holdings, coordinated institutional investor exodus based on documented governance failures, and pursuit of securities fraud charges based on evidence already provided to appropriate regulatory authorities. As the reality of their situation became clear, Atlantic's board fractured. Several members immediately distanced themselves from Sinclair's handling of the crisis, while others recognized the existential threat to the company's market valuation if Imani exercised her full financial leverage. This feels like extortion, Sinclair attempted weakly. This feels like accountability, Imani corrected. Something your airline has systematically avoided until facing someone with the resources to demand it. In that moment, as Atlantic Airlines' stock ticker displayed on boardroom screens showed real-time value erosion, the power dynamic permanently shifted. The discrimination they had dismissed as insignificant had metastasized into a $4 billion existential crisis that threatened not just the company, but the personal wealth and reputation of everyone in the room. One by one, board members who had built careers on never backing down found themselves voting to accept comprehensive terms that would fundamentally transform Atlantic Airlines' corporate culture. Not from moral awakening, but from financial self-preservation when confronted with irrefutable evidence and unassailable leverage. As the board meeting concluded, Sinclair approached Imani with forced professional courtesy. "You've won this round, Dr. Wright. I hope you find the outcome satisfying." "This wasn't about satisfaction," Imani replied calmly. "It was about ensuring that the next qualified black professional flying first class doesn't need $4 billion in leverage to receive basic human dignity." Camera flashes illuminated the tension on Richard Sinclair's face as he stood awkwardly beside Imani Wright at the press conference podium. Behind them, massive screens displayed Atlantic Airlines' plummeting stock value in real time, down 34% since the discrimination incident first went viral. Atlantic Airlines acknowledges serious failures in our treatment of Dr. Imani Wright and other passengers of color, Sinclair read mechanically from the prepared statement. "We accept full responsibility for discriminatory practices that violated our stated values and diminished the dignity of our customers." The unprecedented public admission sent shockwaves through the airline industry and corporate America more broadly. Never had a major corporation so explicitly acknowledged systematic discrimination rather than dismissing incidents as isolated misunderstandings by rogue employees. Imani stepped to the microphone next. "Today marks a beginning, not an ending. The $4 billion in investments I control will remain conditionally invested in Atlantic Airlines, contingent upon verified implementation of comprehensive anti-discrimination protocols and meaningful diversity throughout all levels of corporate leadership." Financial analysts gasped audibly at the confirmation of her investment authority. The mystery of who controlled the leverage that had brought Atlantic to its knees was finally solved, revealing a black woman who had turned her own humiliation into industry-changing power. Within hours, Atlantic Airlines announced the termination of Trevor Sanders and severed all business relationships with Brad Whitman's construction company. More significantly, they published previously confidential diversity statistics showing dramatic underrepresentation of minorities throughout management ranks, along with a detailed 3-year plan to address these disparities. The corporate consequences extended far beyond Atlantic. Legacy Capital's board called an emergency session to address CEO Marcus Reynolds' handling of the situation and his previously undisclosed conflicts of interest regarding competing airline investments. By day's end, Reynolds had tendered his voluntary resignation, and the board had approved a comprehensive review of the firm's diversity practices and ethical guidelines. For Imani Wright, personal vindication came with professional transformation. While Atlantic Airlines implemented required changes under the supervision of an independent oversight committee on which she now served, Imani received acquisition offers from multiple financial institutions impressed by her strategic brilliance. She ultimately declined these offers, instead partnering with Luminous Capital to establish Wright Equity Partners, a new investment firm specializing in corporate accountability through strategic financial leverage. Their first fund raised over $20 billion from institutional investors seeking both competitive returns and meaningful social impact. 6 months after the fateful flight, Atlantic Airlines hosted an industry conference on corporate diversity that would have been unimaginable before their public reckoning. Richard Sinclair, humbled by the experience and fighting to save his career, introduced new executive leadership reflecting previously absent diversity. "Our mistakes came from homogeneous thinking," Sinclair acknowledged in his opening remarks. When everyone in decision-making positions shares similar backgrounds and experiences, blind spots become institutionalized. True excellence requires diverse perspectives. The transportation industry underwent seismic changes as other airlines scrambled to avoid becoming the next Atlantic. Major carriers implemented unconscious bias training, revised discriminatory policies, and established meaningful oversight mechanisms. More importantly, institutional investors began requiring verifiable diversity metrics as part of their ESG evaluation criteria. 1 year after being dragged humiliated from an airplane, Dr. Imani Wright stood before 500 aspiring minority business students at her alma mater. The packed auditorium fell silent as she reflected on her journey. "They assumed I was powerless because that's what the system is designed to make us believe," she explained. "But understanding how systems work reveals their vulnerabilities. Financial leverage speaks louder than moral appeals in corporate America. When you can affect quarterly profits, you suddenly have everyone's attention." She paused, surveying the eager faces before her. "I couldn't fight back as a passenger being discriminated against. But I could fight back as a financial manager, controlling billions in capital. The question isn't whether you'll face discrimination. Sadly, you will. The question is what unique leverage you're developing right now to change the systems that enable it." In the audience, a young black woman raised her hand. "But most of us won't control billions in investments. How do we fight back without that kind of leverage?" Imani smiled. "That's exactly why I established the Transportation Equity Foundation with my settlement funds. We provide legal representation and strategic support for discrimination cases regardless of the victim's resources. When companies realize every passenger might have invisible support systems behind them, the calculation changes." As she concluded her presentation, breaking news flashed across attendees' phones. The Department of Transportation had just announced comprehensive new regulations prohibiting discriminatory practices in commercial aviation, informally known as the Wright Rules. The systemic change Imani had initiated had transcended one airline, one incident, and one individual fight. What began with humiliation had culminated in transformation that would benefit countless travelers who would never know her name but would experience dignity because she had refused to accept anything less. As for Atlantic Airlines, their stock eventually recovered most of its losses as they genuinely embraced the changes initially forced upon them. The airline that had once embodied discriminatory practices gradually earned recognition for authentic inclusion efforts, proving that corporate accountability could lead to sustainable transformation rather than mere damage control. Imani Wright had demonstrated that sometimes justice requires more than moral appeals. It requires leveraging the very systems that enable discrimination against those who perpetuate it. In doing so, she had written a new playbook for accountability. In an age where corporate power often seemed beyond the reach of individual consequences, the final measure of her victory wasn't the personal vindication or professional success that followed, but the subtle shift in power dynamics throughout corporate America. In boardrooms nationwide, executives began asking a question that had never before factored into their discrimination risk calculations. What if this person has the financial leverage of an Imani Wright? That question alone had made the skies friendlier for everyone. Dr. Imani Wright's extraordinary journey teaches us that true power often lies beyond conventional understanding. While most discrimination victims lack her financial leverage, her story illuminates universal principles applicable to everyone facing injustice. First, document everything. Imani's meticulous evidence collection proved crucial when facing institutional denial. In today's digital world, recordings, screenshots, and written records create accountability where systems fail to provide it. Second, identify your unique leverage. Everyone possesses some form of influence, whether professional expertise, community connections, or specialized knowledge. Effective advocacy requires recognizing and strategically deploying your specific strengths against seemingly overwhelming opposition. Third, build coalitions. Imani succeeded not through individual action alone, but by assembling diverse allies with complementary capabilities. When fighting systemic problems, collective action multiplies impact exponentially. Fourth, prepare for backlash. Those challenging established power should anticipate character assassination, intimidation, and isolation tactics. Imani's foresight in predicting her opponent's moves enabled her to transform apparent setbacks into strategic advantages. Fifth, target systems, not just symptoms. Rather than seeking personal compensation, Imani recognized that meaningful change required restructuring the incentives that enabled discrimination. By aligning accountability with financial self-interest, she created sustainable transformation, where moral appeals alone might have failed. Perhaps most importantly, Imani demonstrates that sometimes justice requires strategic patience. Her willingness to endure short-term losses positioned her for decisive victory when opponents believed the threat had passed. The ultimate lesson transcends this specific case. When discrimination persists, despite moral arguments, follow the power. In corporate America, financial leverage speaks louder than ethical appeals. By understanding how systems maintain inequality, we can identify their vulnerabilities and transform them from within. What forms of leverage exist in your own life that could be used to combat injustice? Have you ever witnessed discrimination and wished you had the tools to effectively respond? Comment below with your thoughts on how ordinary people without billions in financial power can still create meaningful change. If Imani's strategic brilliance inspired you, hit that like button to help more people discover her story. Subscribe for more powerful narratives about individuals who refuse to accept systemic injustice and find innovative ways to transform broken systems. Thank you for joining us for this remarkable journey from humiliation to transformation. May we all find the courage to stand against discrimination and the wisdom to do so effectively. Remember, sometimes the most powerful response isn't immediate confrontation, but strategic patience that leads to lasting change.